Ooh, the joy of analog. In a previous episode, we had discussed vinyl. My wife had recently started collecting vinyl records, and it turns out she's far from alone. Vinyl outsold CDs starting several years ago. And the joys of analog are not limited to odd audiophiles, to people with turntables. It extends to photography as well. Several years ago, I bought a Polaroid camera, the Polaroid 600, from a flea market. I paid $10 for it. And once you own a vintage camera, how do you get the film? How do you develop the film? On the case of a Polaroid, of course, I don't have to worry about developing it, but they still manufacture the film. You could buy it brand new. I can get it at Best Buy, no problem. And so, again, there is a niche here, a group of people who are willing to invest the time and the money and the research into analog photography. So what happens when you make that your life and your business and you serve those people? Because I assume it's your hobby and interest as well. So we found someone who's done just that. Paul McKay from Analogue Wonderland is joining us, and he's going to talk us through his adventure in film photography as an entrepreneurial career. Mr. McKay, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Kurt. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to hear that you are collecting a little subset of episodes around the analog resurgence.
Unintentional, but I'm thrilled. Just the analog stuff is fascinating. Of course, I'm 40, I'm middle-aged, and so there's some nostalgia there as well. I can't wait until we start collecting. Are people collecting cassette tapes yet? When are we going to move on to other weird items?
Yeah, mini disc players would be pretty niche.
Oh, I've looked up prices on mini disc players, and not as crazy as a Walkman, but getting up there. Also, mini disc player, they've got this cyberpunk, retro future quality to them. I think that's what gets me. It's anything that has a retro future vibe to it.
Yeah, and those were sort of the crossover where digital was coming in. So you're recording them on disc, but then you could input the title names and things. I don't remember you could do that and stuff. So
it was right before the iPod came to rule all. And then even that too has already come and gone. Now it's just your iPhone and Spotify. We're done.
Yep. So and the outside of vinyl and film, board games has seen the same thing. Hardback books. Hardback books were meant to be killed, and now you get limited edition physical books and things like that. So yeah, it ties into a much wider thing for sure.
So yeah, this is a larger trend where people are I just want to own a physical good again. Please just give me something I can hold in my hands and I know is real. I really think that's a lot of it. So tell me about Analogue Wonderland. What is it? What do you sell?
So we sell photographic film. We sell film for Polaroid, and the story behind Polaroid is pretty wacky. We also sell 35mm, 120, and then some of the really niche formats like 110, 620, 127 that people might remember. They're often the oldest ones, so sort of 100-year-old, these formats. We sell cameras. We sell some second-hand cameras, and we also have an in-house processing lab developing, scanning, printing your photos as well. So sort of moving towards the one-stop shop idea for film photographers. Sort of 5.5 years old as the business, and we started off in the sort of the pure retail side, and then we've added more and more as we've grown.
And so that was 5 years ago you started this, 2018?
Yeah, May 2018.
And how's it going?
It's going okay. I mean, the last year and a half has been pretty brutal for small business. I know that's true everywhere, but in the UK, we've added our own personal flavour of difficulty by also locking ourselves out of our closest trading partner. I'm not going to make any political statements. I'm just going to say that...
I think you already have.
Yeah, I mean, the upsides are yet to appear in my P&L, put it that way. The downsides are there. We also did some crazy things where we had a prime minister for 6 weeks who came in and made the cost of living crisis worse a year ago. So all these little extra bits just to make small business in particular slightly more tricky. But aside from that, it's going okay. I mean, yeah, I think those things every UK business owner would be nodding along to at the moment. And then there's a few things that I think are niche specific. So we have the rather beautiful combination of trying to run a sort of a modern business with technology and products that in most cases are 20 years old, if not more, especially on the lab side. I mean, that stuff, there's a lot of things that make life difficult. But fundamentally, I think you're right, that point of people just want to hold things, and the appeal of physical. And I think I see sort of two things. One is us lot who remembered it from the first time, and it's like reminiscent, and oh my god, like that's my first family holidays was shot on film, and I have photos of me as a baby on film. And then the new generation of people who never experienced it the first time, but grew up with an iPhone in their pocket, like that was how you recorded everything, who are now being exposed to this thing, or discover it and realize there's this whole other way of capturing a photograph that is not instant, that is not immediately shareable, that isn't filters, and is incredibly choiceful and difficult sometimes, and all of this kind of stuff. And that's hugely appealing to people who are used to screens. So
That's what I love about it, the intentionality. Like at the Polaroid, it's like, all right, you get 8 shots out of this, and so you better really think it through. And like each one is, $2 versus a phone. I just rattle off 100, and what's the cost there? Nothing, right? And it could just disappear. Versus when you have like there's just the one single photo, and then of course there's like an aesthetic appeal to it. Even if I digitize it, I scan it, there's still that distinct Polaroid look that like you could do it with filters, but it's not the same. It's never the same.
No, and it happens to me fairly regularly where you make friends with someone and you'll add on WhatsApp, and then you'll see on their profile photo, and I'll be like, you shot that on film. And they're like, yes. I say, yeah, you can see. I mean, there'll be digital photographers right now screaming and saying, no, you can definitely replicate that look. And you absolutely can sit in Photoshop or download filters that do it. And there's some people that do that, and that's fine, but that is definitely not what most people are in it for.
So how did you get into this? 5 years ago, what occurs where you're like, you know what? I'm going to start selling this weird dying hobby as an online store.
Yeah, so life is too easy. No, it was... It's always been my hobby. So I grew up in that, I'm similar age to you, I grew up in that weird period where my first memories of photography were film. Then digital came along and everyone had a DSLR. Weddings used to be like everyone had a DSLR for a couple of years. And they're fantastic for learning some technical skills very, very quickly because the feedback loop is so fast, right? You just learn. But I just didn't enjoy it. I just didn't enjoy the process very, very much. Which felt weird because I had Polaroid through university and really enjoyed that. And then I came out of university and I started a corporate career with P&G in sales and marketing. Did that for 10 years and learned a lot and really enjoyed that, and learned a lot about business. And analog photography was my sort of fun hobby away from spreadsheets and computers and data and fast pace and all this kind of stuff. It's very much the opposite. I used to live in central London. There are a couple of stores that still served film photographers, like in the film and the cameras and the developing. It's really awesome. Then I moved away to Yorkshire, and there just wasn't the same support outside of the big cities. If you were lucky to live near a local store, then happy days. You could do it for ages. But outside of those real core hubs, there wasn't very much, and it was difficult to buy online. Like you could sometimes buy from Amazon, but film needs to be looked after. It needs to be kept at a certain temperature. It goes off after a couple of years. All of these things you can never be quite sure. And a lot of the sort of the traditional stores didn't necessarily have particularly modern websites. And I just thought, maybe there are more people like me. Maybe there are more people like me. And I started the business with my mum at the time, who had just retired. I dragged her kicking and screaming back out of retirement. Said, hey, let's try this. If it sells £10 worth, then in 3 months' time we use it to fund a drink each, and it was just a fun experience. But actually what happened was within 6 months it was like, actually, you know what, there are more people like me than I thought there might be, and I was really enjoying it. And it's sort of time for a change as well. There's a lot to be said about the stability of the corporate life, but the enjoyment and the fun, the excitement was all there. So made the jump, and then here we are 5 years later.
So is this your full-time gig?
Yes, and has been for 3.5 years, 4 years.
You had a corporate gig before this. Was it at all related? Were there skills you were able to leverage from that?
Yes, and I think that's where I really enjoyed, because I always said about my old my old life, my corporate life, was I always really enjoyed the retail. Effectively, I enjoyed retail. I enjoyed that idea of having products and bringing them to people and marketing them, and in a way that was relevant. And I also enjoyed the data side of it. I did enjoy it, but I just never cared about washing up liquid. There, I've said it now. Or shampoo and all these things that I sold for many years, and that's there's no criticism there, that has to be done. But my ideal job was enjoying the life of retail, but with something I actually cared about. And then when you get into something like this that does have its challenges as a community, as an industry, there's so many issues around the history of what happened when digital came in and totally disrupted this industry, that actually having some wider retail skills, I think, is actually probably quite helpful. Like, I know how to operate on that big scale, and there are sort of a couple of big commercial giants in the world, just a very different means. So I was trying to sort of match my skills to that in a much smaller, much more relevant way, but also in a way that makes a load more impact. You can see it in a way that you never could in a corporate life, which is by far and away one of the biggest appeals.
And so when you did say, I'm going to start this store, what happened? What were you thinking? Also, like, where do you get inventory, right? Similar to, we mentioned vinyl, like a lot of it is going to be vintage stuff, it's going to be used stuff. Anytime we're collecting, anytime we're into, geez, I don't even know how you would describe an arcane hobby like this, but like, obviously, I don't think people are mass producing chemical film anymore.
Yep. Some are. So versus the world that used to exist, where every continent had big factories that would churn out, 1 million rolls an hour to supply the world. And when digital came along, that obviously broke that business model. And one of the biggest issues, of course, is for an industry that's used to operating at scale, for that volume to half, you suddenly can't cover your overheads, and things can go wrong very, very quickly, which they did for Kodak up in Rochester, for Ilford over in the UK, and for Fujifilm over in Japan, and several others of lower scales across there. But the good news was that enough machinery was saved from the scrap heap. Enough people said, I'm still going to be here until they drag me out the door. That when, through the digital real collapse, enough people stuck around that when it started to grow again and it started to come back and people started to turn away from the idea that digital would solve all of our creative and aesthetic and sort of spare time needs, there was enough there for people to continue to do. So, and it's a funny situation now where often we're constrained by these decisions made 20 years ago by people desperately trying to save the business as it was. One brilliant example is Kodak. So they used to have I think it was a finishing plant in Mexico that used to finish a lot of the films, the last stage, and they had, I think it was 12 machines that would all run parallel. And they brought 2 up to Rochester when they closed and scrapped and demolished that site, and 2's now not enough. And they really, really wish they brought 3 back or 4 back, because the difference it would make to now is phenomenal. But the fact they even brought 2 is the difference between colour film being made fresh today and it not existing at all. The Polaroid one, we've mentioned it a few times, but I mean, craziness there is Polaroid went down, and a couple of the ex-employees said, we cannot let this go. But they didn't have the rights, the recipes, the licenses, or the machinery. All they had was their knowledge of having worked in that factory for years. So they started from scratch, with the memory of the chemistries and the machines, and said, what if we started again? And they called themselves the Impossible Project. And
good name.
Exactly. There's a famous Edwin Land quote that is something like, don't do anything unless it's basically impossible. I butchered it, but it comes from the guy who started Polaroid. And their first films were terrible. Like they technically worked some of the time, but not all, and the emulsion was wrong, and you could see it, but they were like, we just need to sell some. Please, it is an investment in us. Like, some of your photos might work, just enjoy it, and the money goes back in. And they got better and better at it, and they grew and grew, and then they managed to buy part of the Polaroid brand back, called Polaroid Originals, and then eventually, a couple of years ago, it came full circle, and the brand and the license and everything came back together, and now they are Polaroid once more. But they have gone through this whole thing to come back to the thing. But without that team of people who said, no, I will not let this die, it would never ever have happened. And now Polaroid are making brand new cameras. They've made new cameras. They launched one a couple of weeks ago, created from scratch. They're launching new films created from scratch now. They're back in that positive cycle. And it's only because mid-noughties there were some people who just refused.
So there's a revival that's occurring, and you just happen to be right place, right time, riding that wave.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, exactly. And the fact that it's me who has my, particular enjoyment of it comes back from the age that I am, that I could have that nostalgia and see it. So yeah, 100%. And then there's a load of beautiful craft businesses that are sort of spinning off it now, where people are starting their own things. I mean, in the background, I've got just down there a 4x5 camera where someone has 3D printed a large format camera.
Oh, look at that.
With the craziest material. And because the 3D printing ability appeared, this guy knows how 4x5 cameras works and goes, brilliant, what if we had large format cameras, but they were neon blue? Brilliant. So then he kickstarted that, raised funds, made those. And so you get this lovely cycle then where when people realize that more people are into it, people start to create things, and they won't all be massive businesses and ideas in the future, but they sustain this community and this idea and this niche. And that's what's really then been really cool and really exciting. People using modern techniques to try and solve things that were difficult before. Before you had to make 4x5 cameras out of pieces of wood and cloth, and so your woodwork skills were imperative, whereas now I can send you that file and you could 3D print one yourself.
I love 3D printing. Anytime I'm successful, I feel like a machine operator, like I did it. Like I could go manufacture anything at this point, and of course, couldn't be further from the truth. But so when you start something like this, the hard part is going 0 to 100. How do you get those initial orders, when no one knows to look for you? It sounds like maybe there's a community aspect here, word of mouth. What was it?
100% community word of mouth. Like the first thing and also it's one of the easiest things to do, quote unquote easy, but easiest things to do when you genuinely come from the community. Like I've met people in the last 5 years who have seen film as an opportunity on paper. They've done the research, they've spotted a revival, they've added it together, and they've gone, we can capture a segment of this, which is a very legitimate way of starting any business. I'm not shooting it down by any means, but the upside of coming through something and genuinely just wanting to work in something that you enjoy is that when the word of mouth campaign, me speaking to people that I speak to and shoot film and who happen to run blogs that I've read and say, hey, I'm doing this. And it was brilliant before we started. I gave them all access to the preview on Shopify and said, like, tell me what's wrong, tell me what you'd want to see or what isn't there. So then by the time it launched, it wasn't just me and my mum's ideas as to what they should look like. It was the community's ideas, at least at the time. And of course, now I'll probably look back and find that website and laugh at how naive I was and how idealistic I was about how important images down the page are and all that kind of stuff. But it meant that people would go on and it doesn't look like somebody who spotted a business opportunity and built a website. It looks like somebody who cares about film, who enjoys retail. At least I think
that's one of the tough parts about having a niche business like this. The people who are in it are going to sniff you out immediately if you're not genuine. And so when you're doing it out of passion, and then you're like, also, I'm not going to be mad if I make money from it, but serving the community comes first. That's when you really succeed. I think it's just that's the authenticity that everyone is desperate for. That's the reason they're after analog photography in the first place, because I want something real and authentic. And you can't fake it. You have to have it available. And so it sounds like you said, hey, I was sharing the Shopify preview. This was always on Shopify. You started with Shopify. Why did you pick Shopify from the get-go?
I had done I think I'd played with a couple of things. I think on Squarespace, like I'd done a photo exhibit a couple of years before with some of my own photography. I'd gone to North Korea to run a half marathon, which is a separate conversation probably. But I'd played with Squarespace Commerce on that and had seen what it was like. Someone else had shown me their WooCommerce site, and Shopify at the time just looked the best. And I think great decision, because I think that gap has opened over the past 5 years. And I think as well, when I there's an element where you sit down with like a spreadsheet and go pros and cons and features and benefit and all that kind of stuff and price per month. And there's an element where you look behind it and say, what seems to be the intent? And genuinely, I think the intent from Shopify has always seemed very, very good and aligned with the values of somebody who is doing this, as you say, because they enjoy it. And if I make money, I won't be mad. That hasn't happened yet, but when it does, I won't be mad, I promise. And that seems to have come true. Now, admittedly, every so often I get grumpy about some of the AI stuff. But again, that's, in fact, I was one the other day, it was like, on Twitter, I was like, yeah, you can now use AI to like write your about us page. And I was like, if your AI is writing your about page, like that feels like a problem. Like you're not building a brand at that point. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah, you're just checking a box.
Exactly. That feels like what somebody, in a nice possible way, an accountant making a business because they spot a business opportunity. Again, it goes back to that thing like, what's next? Oh, yeah, about us page. I need to write something that is about how I authentically love this product and how I care about the specific thing. Anyway, but the intent of like how they approach things and, some of the stuff they do, and you look at the innovation pipeline and all of that kind of stuff, and it just speaks to us. Now, there's times when we definitely run up against the edges of what's possible in Shopify. In fact, that's when we first chatted, when you turned me down a couple of years ago with some of that. But that's, I can't be mad at Shopify, because that is, when you're running a film lab, is so far away from make a t-shirt, sell a t-shirt.
Right.
Well, as you know from the conversations we had 2 years ago, so we've had to go out and build stuff to help. But as I say, I can't be mad at Shopify for that. That is not a wide use case, and there's not much that is really applicable to either.
So you've been at it 5 years. You've been on Shopify. You joked like, hey, when we do make money, I won't be mad about it. Where do you see yourself in that entrepreneurial journey?
Well, it's I think it's quite an interesting one, because I feel very in between. I think, and you go on LinkedIn, or you listen to podcasts around entrepreneurs, and I feel like there's sort of two camps. One is very much the, hey, I'm at the start of the journey with this brand, like it's really exciting. Growth is exponential, small absolute numbers maybe, or whatever, but massive changes. Every month looks different, and I'm getting through this on adrenaline and enthusiasm and energy. And I feel like I'm out of that phase. You can sustain that for so long, especially when you're doing it as a side hustle. You have to do it, and that's the really exciting, fun bit. But then at some point, it becomes a day job, and you sort of lose that. And then I see this other bucket of people who are like, wise old heads, like remembering back when they were young, and then now they have these 10 things to do to make your business successful and all of this. And I feel like I sit firmly in the middle, Kurt. I feel like I'm too old and tired for the really young, energetic. I mean, I have a young daughter as well, which doesn't help, but I'm too old for the young, energetic. Adrenaline will see me through, and I definitely don't feel like I'm anywhere near the point where I could give pearls of wisdom to anyone else. So I want more content for like tired middle-aged men, but tired middle-aged people who are entrepreneurs by definition, but sit somewhere between the two.
I think a lot of that though is on social media, it's everybody's highlight reel. They're not as inclined to share the hard stuff with you, and so everybody's dealing with their own trials, and it's tough not to compare yourself, but you got to run your own race.
And I think it's like it's not necessarily even the tough things. It's more like, the first day I realized I'd have to run a budget review for like the marketing spend or whatever. And I'm like, no, come on, I've run my own business like this. Why am I putting in meetings that I know are going to bore me before I start? But you have to, you have to do. There has to be a due diligence side of the business as well as the fun, exciting, and selling products I love to a community I really care about. I've also got to sit down and look at spreadsheets.
And on the topic of marketing, what's working right now versus what doesn't?
I find that a really difficult question because I struggle when you're in your own business again, and you don't have a big corporation where you can look at someone doing something similar in a different country or a different category. You have all these benchmarks. There's things that are definitely working better than last year and things that definitely don't pay out. But I also know that any part of my marketing, if I sit down for more than 10 minutes and look at, I'll pick holes with myself on how we can do better. But I think if I try and take a step back from that view, I think the basics are always good, like having a blog strategy, an email strategy, a content strategy, really, that informs the way that you talk to people, making sure that it's consistent with actually what you want to be talking about. You don't get dragged into this trend or this topic or this thing that isn't really about what you're about. Like, be clear on what you are about and then communicate it regularly and clearly. And what I've quite enjoyed in the last month is with one of my team, we've really tried to nail that down, written down for the first time. Like, what are we about? We can talk for ages and do interviews and go around the topics, but if I had to write down 50 words, what would they say? If I had to write down 5 things, what would they be? And that's been a really helpful exercise and quite illuminating, I think, because then you go back and go, well, we said this one thing that we really care about. When's the last time we told anyone through any channel about it? And it's like 6 months. And you go, well, either we don't care about it or there's a massive gap in our content pillar strategy. So I'm finding that really interesting at the moment. But I think the basics are not being, as I say, not being distracted by the trends. We've all seen all the AI stuff, and I'm going to shoot myself if I watch one more blog that is clearly ChatGPT written.
Yeah, it didn't take long to be able to just clearly spot it.
Exactly. And again, I'm not against it as a concept. We use AI as a copywriter, but it doesn't speed up our work. It slows it down, but in a good way, because it's another person in the room. It's another thing that you say, well, let's see what ChatGPT might write, and then you incorporate it and you critique it, and it makes it better quality, I think, but it doesn't speed it up. And you watch people who go from posting one blog every 2 weeks to look at this 100 blogs, and you're like, you've given ChatGPT to an intern. We can see, and if we can see, it's only a matter of time before Google's engineers work out how to measure it, and then it will disappear back where it came from.
But that's a good point.
It's only a matter of time, right? They've done this before. Like, people who came up in the 90s know you used to be able to post a keyword in the same color as your wallpaper on the HTML, and it would think you were really
some old school black hat SEO.
Exactly, yeah.
The keyword stuffing.
And it's an arms race, but fundamentally, take a step back. There's the analog photography, and the analog people who are into analog are particularly skeptical of that kind of stuff, because it is against the reason we're here is because people have different parts of the hobby that they enjoy, which is one of the reasons I really love it. But fundamentally, it's something about the authenticity that comes through. And if you're not authentic in your marketing, if you're running it like just like a digital marketing campaign would run it. But I mean, the downside is that also makes it hard, because it's very hard to work with agencies. It's not that there aren't good agencies or anything like that, but the voice is so difficult to strike the right chord.
Right.
It's really hard, and also something that's slightly more technical as well. Like, if you're not using the right terminology, it's very easy to pick up very, very quickly, which is great, because if you're in it like me and my marketing manager, like, we both shoot film loads. It's rare that we would, and if we say something wrong, it's because we're idiots, not because we're not authentic. Whereas sitting down and teaching an agency film photography before you even get close to brand voice would just be so much work. But,
yeah, that's the issue with real technical products, where the customer's sophisticated. Like, the target buyer will know it. They'll sniff it out immediately. And then, because it's so community driven, if that becomes the reputation, well, now all that credibility you worked on is gone. And so, obviously, online discussions clearly help the community. What other community building events are in there? It looks like you're doing some in-person stuff.
Oh, 100%. And we have done, apart from that weird year with COVID, we have done all the time, because again, even through the way that sort of the community held together through the digital surge was there were a lot of forums. Most of them have been died eventually under the weight of Meta and Google various changes over the years. But there were forums that kept things alive online, and there were in-person meets and camera clubs and university dark rooms and all of that kind of stuff. Like back when I was up in Yorkshire, I used to do it was an adult learning course evening thing. I mean, it had a syllabus, but we all ignored it because it was just really a social. We'd all go using darkroom, and it got funding for the university because we promised that we were learning stuff at the same time. And that kind of thing always happens. So yeah, like as a marketing activity, we do photo walks, where we'll pick a location. Some of them might be themed, because the idea as well is like, we want to drive accessibility to all. And traditionally, film photography, like many similar hobbies, was primarily the premise of a certain demographic, and we want it to be open to all. So we run LGBTQI plus walks. We run She Hearts film walks, where I'm not invited for obvious reasons. Female film photographers go around and discuss in a safe environment, and that kind of thing is really important, because again, impossible to measure on any kind of ROI scale. But the good thing is it also feels less like an investment, because ultimately I'm turning up and doing my hobby with people who are also doing my hobby, many of whom are now friends anyway, or were friends before. And yeah, then we can also turn it into a blog and share it on Instagram, and it's fun. Like we had a community event last week where myself and a few other analog businesses in the UK put on an event across a weekend in Nottingham. 150 odd people came up. There were workshops.
150 for an in-person event. Nothing to sneeze at. That's not easy to do.
No, I know, and it was a lot of voluntary work from all of us. We charged for tickets, but it was covering costs and all that kind of stuff. But it was amazing, because people again walked out really, really excited about the hobby and the community and the industry, and that's really hard to capture. I haven't seen many other sort of communities or industries manage to have something like that. But again, it goes back to the tangible nature. I'm sure vinyl probably does actually have craft beer, maybe things like that. There are certain things that make sense for people to get together and socialize. But also the running joke on film photography is that we're not necessarily very sociable. We like to go on photo walks and walk around, not quite looking each other in the eye, but having a brilliant time. And you take 2 photos and then you go to the pub and just look at each other's cameras. But it's social and it's fun, and it helps drive everything forward.
And you do it's like, is it Analogue Wonderland presents October photo walk?
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. And when by no means the only ones. Like we actually did one recently with a company called Cinestill, who are based in California, who were over in London, and we collaborated with them and another lab in London to host a photo walk. They had 200 people there. Great walk through London. Now, Cinestill is a brand, an excellent brand, and they had the Californian glamour of turning up. But yeah, it just goes to show, like it's this weird. I just find it so strange that like it's an analog hobby that is primarily enjoyed physically with people, but we're an e-commerce business, and we have to sort of somehow match this. And then you sort of go, well, it's not just that. It's like our lab. So some of the scanners in there, because of the fact that innovation died overnight, some of our scanners run Windows XP, some of our scanners run Windows 98. We have to source monitors that are 4x3 instead of 16x9. Like, where do you find those anymore?
CRT monitors, which someone brilliantly rebranded as retro gaming monitors. So the price went up. Like CRT monitors were previously worthless, you'd pay someone to take them. Now, retro gaming monitor.
Retro gaming or lab scanner monitors. There we go. Like there's a graphic of a workman running a floppy disk into a folder to show the process. But we can't let those anywhere near the internet. The internet would kill them, obviously, with all the viruses. So we have to have like a tech stack that goes Windows 98 to a customer's iPhone 15. That's what we've got to try and design in a way that makes sense somehow.
And then with a computer that can't be updated, you got to air gap it, meaning it cannot be connected to the internet.
So you then have to have like built in-house servers, and suddenly you're running an analog photography business talking about building your own servers just to run the basic functionality, which is just bizarre. No one at the time would have obviously anticipated this, and now we're sort of looking back and trying to retrofit it, and it's a happy mess.
So
Which again, Shopify is not going to help with that, and I totally understand why.
yeah, you might be one of one with that one. So I mean, that tech stack. That's because you're dealing with retro stuff. An interesting and unique challenge for you. What other challenges do you see down the road for Analogue Wonderland?
Well, for us, I mean, like any business, we're looking to scale, we're looking to grow, and we've got some ideas to do that. And I think the interesting thing as well is like it comes from the community business side. We have grown our business around what the community needs and what it's looking for. So I look at other friends who've grown businesses, and maybe they have a skincare business that sells skincare, and then they want to expand. So they make it a beauty business, and that adds on hair care or that adds on makeup, but fundamentally it's still product store customer. Whereas adding a lab on was a totally different business model, totally different needs from a website, totally different experience for the customer. But we've got to try and make it somehow coherent and cohesive. And Shopify obviously is a good base for that, but then we've had to build software that works outside of that. We have to then somehow connect it to the things that were last updated before the Millennium Bug. And it has to all sort of flow in a way that for the customer, it feels modern. Because the other thing that is always a bit dissonant sometimes is this is a hobby that people will happily, they'll start a roll of film and then finish it a year later. But if they send it to you, they want the photos back within a couple of days. And if not, they start to ask, you're like, come on, like, this is an 80-year-old camera, and your photos are at least over a year old, but you still want the convenience of, and it's separating, they have an expectation of their hobby that is slow and mindful and present and relaxed. They have an expectation of their retail experience, which is modern and should be fast and convenient and should work on their phone and, all of this kind of stuff. And it's so a lot of my time is spent trying to bridge this gap between sort of what's inherently possible and what these things were designed for originally, and what the modern film photographer needs.
That's an interesting dichotomy. You're right. With the Polaroid film, even like with 8 of those, it might be months before I get through it. Versus, if I had to like that's instant. But if I had to develop it, then all right, I still want that modern experience. Because I'm certainly not going to my local pharmacy, my local drugstore, dropping it off and picking it up an hour later. That's long gone. That's over.
Yeah, and there's a weird like cultural hang-ups that we run into as well, where there's still an understanding that 1 hour turnaround was a thing, and it was a thing back when every high street thing had a machine in the back. It would be a 1 hour service. There's still this like cultural remembrance of this, even in people who are too young to have been alive the last time that was happened in a town, and you sort of don't know where it's come from. The other one is like the way it used to work is you take in your film and you get back prints. That's what you get back. You wouldn't get back a CD or a USB or anything like that, or an email. You would get back your physical prints, and you'd have 36, and half of them would be out of focus or a bit blurred, or someone's missed it and they're just gone straight in the bin. And then you have a few, and then maybe 1 or 2 you might frame or you might and we sort of, when we were designing the lab, we're like, this is madness. Like, that's not the way to get the best photography, and it's wasteful for the environment, it's wasteful from cost, it's everything. So we designed, part of our system is designed so that you get your films developed, you see the scans, and then you choose which ones you print. You go, right,
Clever.
So those 2 I love, I'll print them. And by the way, actually, I love them so much, can you scan them higher resolution for a bigger print than I'd originally got? So, you put it in, you see the basics, and then you choose what you want. And that leads to more people printing their best photos and really enjoying it. But the education we're having to do on people saying, I want prints. Like, why is prints not an option on your homepage? And you go, no, you will get to it there. And by the way, you're 18. You never walked into a chemist and ordered prints. Yet you're sat here saying to me that's what you expect. And when I explain it to you, you're like, yeah, that's much better. That makes way more sense. But your expectation has come from, and I don't know whether it's movies, whether it's TV shows, whether it's just, as I say, this cultural memory. I just think that if you're starting film photography from scratch now, if it just clicked into being today, no one would say, I want you to print my photos before I see them. You'd never say that. That'd be crazy. Like, why would you waste all that money in paper?
My wife explained, I don't know how it came up, but my wife explained the concept of developing film, like how things worked before iPhones, to our 6-year-old. And when we explained well, you can only take 36 photos and then you drop them off. Like, you go to Walgreens and you drop it off, and then you could go back, pick it up, and then they'll give you your 36 prints, and that's the first time you saw them. She thought this was the funniest thing ever. She thought we were making it up. She was like, did they have color when you were a kid? Like, in the world? Like, she just absolutely thought we were idiots.
I know. Well, I saw something the other day, and where someone, I think it might have been Reddit, where someone was saying, can we just pause for a minute on how crazy vinyl is? Like, someone's looked at a piece of plastic and gone, if I make movements in that can be music. And you can listen to gramophones and things without any electricity from the physical movement of the needle. And it's amazing. Like, if you look at how the technology inside a Polaroid film, it is absolutely incredible. It's stuff that started 200 years ago, the first time people worked out how to make light-sensitive chemistry. But it's still being innovated today, which is just, it's incredibly complex. And the amount of precision that is required to make these things on a scale or even on a small amount is absolutely mind-blowing.
So there's a big education component here for sure. Like, even if I were to dive back into analog film photography, even being quite experienced with the DSLR and having developed film myself 30 years ago, I would still have to get an education. And certainly, if my kids wanted to get into it, it's like, oh, where do we even begin? So if someone wants to dive into film photography, what's the first step they should take?
So you're absolutely right. That is a huge challenge, and people also come back in. We see either brand new with no knowledge, or like you just said there, hey, I remember this from 20 years ago. Like, help me remember. And there's in-person things. So, for example, at that event we did 2 weeks ago, I ran developing workshops where people were developing their film within an hour. There's brilliant YouTube series. So there's several sort of influencers in the field who do a lot of things like that. Like, hey, here's how to develop a roller film at home. Here's how to do a print. Some of the manufacturers invest in the education side as well. For me, I think we definitely try and do a bit of that, but I think the manufacturers are often the very best at that because they're the ones who are like, look, we understand these products best. I think what I try and do, not necessarily successfully, but I try and do is I try and capture that underlying intent, that underlying desire. Because if I talk one-to-one, many people about the fun of it, it's not a difficult sell often to say, hey, this is a physical, authentic thing. Like, it's fun. The cameras are beautiful. There's history. Like, a lot of people shoot with their grandparents' camera, their dad's camera, their uncles or their aunts. There's this sort of generational memory that's baked into some of these machines as well. There's a load of things that make it really fun. But how do you get that through when you're scrolling through Instagram or you're looking on TikTok and all of this kind of thing? And actually, one of the things we sort of come back round to is actually, well, what's the language that allows people to really understand what this is about? And the one at the moment we're playing with and seems to strike a chord is saying, this is all about putting the soul, human, authentic nature that is not technically superior to your iPhone. And by the way, my iPhone can practically see in the dark. It's incredible. Like, the new pixels that turn your frown into a smile. Like, that is how you take family photos and send them on WhatsApp to your nan. Like, please don't try and do film with that. But in terms of an authentic experience, in terms of doing something that you then want to put on your walls, it is way more likely to come about from a physical interaction, a physical experience, and your memory will be baked into the whole thing way more than just pressing a button on the side. And it's sort of that education of what that means and how you can enjoy that. Then you find that actually people will hunt out the specifics, because some people love developing their film and they will spend 2 hours on YouTube watching different comparisons and buying tanks and thermometers, and that is really what their hobby is about, is developing and the chemistry at home. There are some people who love cameras and will quote you the specifications of Leicas from the 1960s and compare shutter sounds and love that. And there are people who care not at all about either of those things and just want the final result or the experience. And so what I try and do is I just try and attract people to this, and just like the analog experience, the analog joy. This is going to be brilliant fun. You're going to enjoy this. You're going to create something you're going to be really proud of. You're going to hold it in your hand. It's not going to replace your iPhone. It's just going to complement your photography experience. Then I find that they will often hone in on one part after a certain time and then go down whichever rabbit hole they so wish, or several of them. And it's that initial moment and that catch and that cut through in a world that is much more geared up towards selling fast, digital, convenient, replaceable, and helping people. Maybe I should speak to your vinyl person, like how to pause and just go, that's not what I'm selling. I'm selling.
I could listen to you wax poetic about the joys of analog all day. It's brilliant, but that's what makes the brand. It's that positioning, it's that messaging, it's being respectful of that and trying to share that, and then provide education and resources around it. And then, oh hey, if you need to buy some of these items, if whether you've got a consumable good, right? The film, that's great. If you want to develop it yourself, great, you've got that. Hey, you want to bring this stuff home, you got that. There's some fun accessories in there as well. I saw you do a box. The business is brilliant. If someone wants to seek you out, where do we go? What's the address?
Analogue Wonderland, spelt the British way with an extra UE. So Analogue UE, wonderland.co.uk.
Wonderful. I will include that in the show notes. Paul McKay, Analogue Wonderland. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kat.